Does that, do you believe that remains of interest to Israel?
I think, we heard Prime Minister Netanyahu saying that a regime change could be the result of the war. And I think that was his understated or sophisticated or polite way to say that he hopes that this is what's going to happen. For now, I have to say, we see no indications that the Iranians are uprising against the regime. We actually see a different phenomenon for now, that there's growing anger at Israel for its strikes in Iran. There's at least a initial rallying around the flag in the last few days. I think that the U.S. strike, there's a chance that the U.S. strikes will increase this momentum of rallying around the flag and growing support for the regime because of the external military intervention. So I think that the question will be what the Iranian regime is going to do next, whether it is going to implement its threats to retaliate militarily against U.S. bases, U.S. forces, U.S. interests in the region. There are thousands of U.S. troops in close range of Iran. The Iranians can also close the Strait of Hormuz, which is something that they threatened to do, which could dramatically influence commercial shipping, international commercial shipping. It could influence oil prices. We are now in a very, very dangerous stage that could lead to significant instability for a very long time in the whole region.
In terms of Israel's operations, though, in the skies over Iran, I assume you don't see any let-up in Israel's air dominance. I mean, do they continue offensive operations, do you think?
I think they could if they wanted. To be honest, I think most of what they planned to strike, they already did. You can always find new targets, but I think most of what they wanted to do, they did. The question now is whether Iran is going to say, okay, let's conduct some sort of retaliation and then stop the war, or the Iranians will say we are now going to escalate and continue firing missiles at Israel. The Iranians have enough launchers and missiles to do it for a very, very long time, and Israel does not have enough interceptors to defeat those missile strikes for much longer. And therefore, if the Iranians choose to continue this war for another 2, 3, 4 weeks, Israel can find itself in a very, very dangerous situation where it cannot intercept Iranian missiles with warheads of close to 2,000 pounds of explosive. This is a very, very dangerous situation.
Barak Ravid, I hope we continue to talk to you. I hope we can talk to you on the other side of President Trump's comments, which should take place in about 7 minutes. Barak, thanks very much. Jeremy Diamond mentioned that you have some news on Benjamin Netanyahu's remarks.
Yeah, we've just gotten a video from the Israeli Prime Minister where he is speaking in English, talking about this U.S. operation. He is talking about this notion of peace through strength. He says first comes strength, then comes peace. But the most significant comments come where he says that tonight America has been unsurpassed. He says it has done what no other country on earth can do, saying history will record that President Trump acted to deny the world's most dangerous regime the world's most dangerous weapons. And he talks once again about the unshakable alliance between the United States and Israel. Make no mistake, even though the Israeli Prime Minister did not, I'm told, explicitly urge President Trump to carry out these strikes, was very cautious not to corner him into that position. This was exactly the scenario that Israeli officials had expected, had hoped for before they even launched this operation. This entire Israeli operation that we have seen unfold over the course of the last week, according to Israeli officials I've spoken to, was premised on the idea that the United States would eventually join in and deliver that final blow, and indeed that has happened tonight. And of course, the Israeli Prime Minister is very happy about it. I'm also told that the Prime Minister will address the Israeli public after President Trump delivers his remarks tonight.
And those remarks should be in about 6 minutes from now. It is interesting, Clarissa. I mean, just to think 10 days ago, the first initial response by the Trump administration was not from President Trump. It was Secretary of State Marco Rubio, also National Security Advisor Marco Rubio, and several other things.
Who said it wasn't us.
Right.
We have nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
Immediate instinct was to create some daylight, to make it clear the U.S. was not involved. We know that President Trump ran on a platform of no more Middle Eastern wars. And I think it's interesting, you know, you talked with Brett McGurk about this idea of Syria and the fall of the Assad regime. And I think in some ways that has emboldened particularly Israel because it seems so easy. A few strategic things happened. Russia mired in Ukraine, Hezbollah weakened, and suddenly Assad vanishes after 40-plus decades.
His entire regime crumbled.
His entire regime crumbled. And so now, instead of thinking of the history of regime change in the Middle East vis-a-vis the American perspective as being Iraq, Afghanistan, things that we think of as being disastrous with hindsight, you have this new potential model whereby you weaken from the inside, you infiltrate intelligence, and suddenly you get lucky, potentially, and a regime magically crumbles away. And when I've spoken to Israeli strategists, they say regime change is not necessarily the strategic objective, but it is the desired outcome. And we've also heard the former head of Mossad warning Israel's leaders that there is a delta sometimes between what you're able to achieve in those early days when you have the momentum on your side and what you get mired into when you get greedy and keep going for more. So it'll be very interesting to see on the back of this where Israel stands now. Is this drawing a line under this once and for all? Or is this the beginning, as the chief of staff of the IDF have warned, of a protracted conflict?
And what would regime change look like in Iran if, in fact, it was? I just, in the minutes we have before President Trump speaks, Natasha Bertrand, I understand, has some new reporting. Natasha, what are you learning?
Yeah, Anderson. So we're told by multiple sources familiar with the matter that the U.S. did convey to Iran through back-channel discussions that the strikes President Trump ordered on the country's nuclear facilities this evening would be contained and that no further strikes were going to be planned moving forward. And that's according to two people familiar with the discussions. Now, it's not immediately clear how this message was actually conveyed to the Iranians. We know that the conversations between the U.S. and Iran have been somewhat halting over the last week, but the White House did confirm just last week that there was still some kind of communication between the governments. But still, very important point here that the U.S. did convey to the Iranians. We're told that this was going to be a limited, as limited as this can be, to these three nuclear facilities, and that there were not going to be additional strikes. Now, we're also learning more about the kind of ordnance that was used in these explosions, and that was these massive bunker buster bombs that the U.S. has that can only be dropped from those B-2 bombers. And this is the first time that those massive ordnance penetrators, those bunker busters, have actually been used operationally. They have been tested many times before. There have been questions about how significantly they could actually damage these nuclear facilities, given how buried underground they are. But we are told that these bunker busters were used here for the first time as part of a conflict, Anderson.
Natasha Bertrand, thanks very much. We're going to be hearing from President Trump in about 3 minutes from now. Brett McGurk is also standing by. Brett, you had, when you and I talked immediately, as soon as we got on air, you had already talked to a senior official who had talked about these back-channel communications, sending that message to Iran that this is it, or the U.S. would like this to be it. What are you going to be listening to hear from President Trump tonight, Brett?
Well, Anderson, I assume he'll reaffirm that in his voice to the world and make clear that this was a limited, contained operation that he's sending in a direct channel to Iran. We heard just from Natasha, I heard that earlier tonight. But also, I think his projection forward for what he wants to see in the Middle East, a little bit what you were just talking about, Anderson. I mean, where does he see this going? His theme is peace through strength. He's done this unprecedented operation, and then where does he see it going? I think we will hear him say he still wants to deal with Iran. He has no animosity towards the Iranian people. But, you know, a president as powerful as he is, I got to step back. He will not be in control of the events here over the coming days. Decisions made in Iran, whether they're coordinated decisions, whether they're one-off decisions by some of their proxies, could set a course of events. We have to be ready for that. But I suspect he will emphasize, as we just heard from Natasha, this was a limited operation with a specific objective, and that's it. And then call for diplomacy and a peaceful Middle East. I assume that's what he'll hear. I hope that's where this goes. But as I said, we got to be prepared for the worst while hoping and working for the best. And sometimes if you get in the middle, that's not bad. But these next few days will be quite something. These are unprecedented times.
Yeah, they certainly are. We'll talk to you after the president's address. It is 10 o'clock on the East Coast of the United States. It's 5 a.m. here in Tel Aviv. We got word of this attack through the president's social media post, which occurred just a little bit more than 2 hours ago. Remarkable given the diplomacy that we saw take place on Friday in Europe, which didn't seem to go anywhere. Whether this was the president's plan all along in setting within 2-week window, it certainly has apparently, according to the U.S., been an effective strike. We're going to hear from the president now momentarily, and we'll have more reporting as soon as he's done. We're waiting for the president to speak here with Jeremy Diamond as well as Clarissa Ward. This is a talk which is not only going to be, here's the president coming now. Let's listen.
Thank you very much. A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime: Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier. For 40 years, Iran has been saying death to America, death to Israel. They have been killing our people, blowing off their arms, blowing off their legs with roadside bombs. That was their specialty. We lost over 1,000 people, and hundreds of thousands throughout the Middle East and around the world have died as a direct result of their hate. In particular, so many were killed by their general, Qasem Soleimani. I decided a long time ago that I would not let this happen. It will not continue. I want to thank and congratulate Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. We worked as a team like perhaps no team has ever worked before. And we've gone a long way to erasing this horrible threat to Israel. I want to thank the Israeli military for the wonderful job they've done. And most importantly, I want to congratulate the great American patriots who flew those magnificent machines tonight, and all of the United States military on an operation the likes of which the world has not seen in many, many decades. Hopefully, we will no longer need their services in this capacity. I hope that's so. I also want to congratulate the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Raisin-Kane, spectacular general, and all of the brilliant military minds involved in this attack. With all of that being said, this cannot continue. There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left. Tonight's was the most difficult of them all, by far, and perhaps the most lethal. But if peace does not come quickly, we will go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill. Most of them can be taken out in a matter of minutes. There's no military in the world that could have done what we did tonight, not even close. There has never been a military that could do what took place just a little while ago. Tomorrow, General Kane, Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth will have a press conference at 8 a.m. at the Pentagon. And I want to just thank everybody, and in particular, God. I want to just say we love you, God, and we love our great military. Protect them. God bless the Middle East. God bless Israel, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you.
President Trump speaking from the White House. I want to bring in Jake Tapper on the phone. Jake, a remarkable turn of events over the last 2 hours here.
It is indeed. And now, of course, the big question is what happens in the next 48 hours. The individuals I've spoken to over the last hour or two who are either in the Trump administration or close to the Trump administration say the next 48 hours is key to see what the Iranians do. Obviously, President Trump, from the remarks we just heard, is hoping that this will be the end of it. But as is said in the military, the enemy gets a vote as well. And some of the things that they'll be looking for, the U.S. observing the Iranians, are, first of all, even though President Trump did describe the strikes on the three sites, Fordo, Natanz, and Esfahan, as having been, quote, completely and totally obliterated, really, it's a question of how accurate that is. Is there any of this weapons program left at all? Obviously, the strikes in Fordo and Esfahan in particular are more difficult, are more easier said than done in terms of total destruction. The Fordo facility, obviously, underneath a mountain. And so the question that a lot of people in the administration are wondering is, was this, in fact, a complete and utter success? And if there is any material left, any nuclear material left, does the strike embolden and empower the hardliners within the Iranian regime to then continue with their nuclear weaponization and program in even more haste? So that's one thing they're going to be looking for. Beyond that, obviously, is the question of what about a military retaliation by the Iranians? The Israelis have degraded to great extent. My sources tell me long-range ballistic missiles that Iran has, but that does leave many short and medium-range ballistic missiles. So the question then, does Iran continue to attack Israel? Does Iran attack U.S. troops, U.S. service members in Iraq, in the UAE, in Qatar? Do they go after any American service members with the Fifth Fleet? Do they do so with missiles? Do they do so with sleeper cells, which are obviously throughout the regime? That's something else that people will be looking at. Will the Iranians look to destabilize the region by attacking the Saudis or the Emiratis, as has happened in the past? Will they try to close off the Straits of Hormuz? So these are some of the questions, and obviously people in military planning and in the White House are already talking about secondary, tertiary, and on and on. For example, you heard President Trump there threaten that if this isn't the end of it, there's more that's going to come, that could come to Iran. One such target might be Karg Island, right off the coast of Iran, which is about 80% of Iran's fuel goes through that site. So that's something else that they'll be looking at. For those who are curious about how this squares with Trump's promise to not get involved in Middle East wars, the domestic politics of that in the United States, sources in the administration say that President Trump does not view airstrikes like this or missile strikes as the same type of thing, an extended, protracted war in the Middle East as we had in Iraq or Afghanistan. And in fact, has long been urging his military to do more to strike the Houthis in Yemen, for example. So I don't know that this actually is at odds with his pledges in the past, but that is something that will be debated by his coalition. And lastly, I guess, Anderson, is the question as to why now? Why did President Trump feel the need to do this, given the fact that his own Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, testified in March, saying that the conclusion of the intelligence community was that Iran had not made the decision to go forward with its nuclear weapons program? Well, the understanding I have is that a lot of Israeli intelligence has contradicted that, especially in the last few months, especially at the Fordow and Isfahan nuclear sites. And as it was described to me, the Iranians, even in the midst of negotiating, Anderson, even in the midst of negotiating, the Iranians had their pedal to the metal, as it were, in terms of the nuclear enrichment program. And so the feeling was inside the White House, they just could not take that risk. And that's where we are.
Yeah, it's certainly a lot of concern on the speed with which, and also obviously the more recent comments by the IAEA, though the IAEA certainly was not calling for any kind of military intervention. They were calling for diplomacy, but they certainly raised concerns about the speed of the nuclear program, the enrichment of the up to 60% enrichment, and the speed with which that could become 90% weapons grade enrichment. Jake, we're going to check back in with you. Kirsten Holmes is standing by at the White House. Kirsten, it was Kirsten Holmes. It was a short speech, but what stood out to you?
Yeah, I think that what he said, what President Trump said there, is exactly what we had been hearing behind the scenes of the conversations he had been having with his advisors in the moments leading up to these strikes, talking about the diplomatic side of this. We know that he said he wanted to stop the nuclear threat. That's why he had to do that. We have been hearing that in the last couple of days, U.S. officials had begun to believe that this was a necessary action. But the other part of this that I really want to point out here was when he said Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. We continue to hear, even in this late hour, even after the strikes, that President Trump and the administration is seeking a deal with Iran. They believe that these strikes will help bring Iran to the table. Obviously, we have differing beliefs among other military officials, but that is the belief of the administration and of President Trump himself, that this could be a singular strike, getting in, getting out, and then getting Iran to the table here. And there's a couple pieces of context that I want to give about where President Trump was and what this speech looked like, because it was very interesting that he stood there in the East Room. President Trump tends to like to deliver these kind of addresses by himself in the Oval Office. But if you'll remember, the East Room is where President Obama delivered the news that Osama bin Laden had been killed. That is the place where we have seen some of the biggest presidential announcements of all time. But also interesting who he had with him. He had his Secretary of Defense. He had Marco Rubio, his Secretary of State. He also had J.D. Vance, the Vice President. These are all people who we have been told have been working with him nonstop. And you have to remember, Anderson, when we talk about this administration, it is so different from other administrations in the fact that they are so insular to the people who are around them and their political beliefs. They are not having the same kind of big meetings with career officials that you saw so many of these past administrations having. A lot of these decisions are being made among a very small group of people who are Trump loyalists, Trump elitists. You even heard him there saying at one point that he thanked his Joint Chiefs of Staff, his chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane. The other part of this that stood out to me was him talking about Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He said, we worked as a great team. We worked as any team could be. I mean, he is clearly putting them both forward in doing these strikes. And that had been something that, as we've been reporting, I mean, the day after Israel struck Iran, the first time, I think it was 2 weeks ago, we saw that statement from the Secretary of State distancing themselves from Benjamin Netanyahu, distancing themselves from Israel, saying that we had nothing to do with this. This was a unilateral attack. Clearly now, this has all changed. It has all evolved. And he is saying that he did this essentially next to the Prime Minister of Israel. Now, of course, the question is what happens next and where do we go from here? And that's what we're trying to get these administration officials on the phone to tell us what they believe the next steps are.
Yeah, a lot of concern, obviously, about what Iran is going to do next, and all eyes waiting for that. We'll check back in with you a little bit. Fareed Zakaria also standing by. Fareed, I mean, this is moving very, very quickly. There's a lot of questions that remain. Benjamin Netanyahu is going to be addressing people here in Israel. We've yet to hear anything official out of Iran. What are you expecting?
Well, the president's speech was quite striking and very different in tone from the way he has been talking about this conflict for weeks, maybe months. For much of the time that he's been talking, he's talked about how he doesn't hold anything against Iran. He thinks of it as a great nation and a great people. He wants it to prosper. They just can't have nuclear weapons. This time, it was a much tougher speech, much tougher on the Iranians, talking about state sponsorship of terrorism, killing Americans, roadside bombs. So it seemed that the president had decided, having used military force, he now wanted to, to amp up the pressure to force an Iranian series of concessions, if not, in fact, some kind of surrender. And what strikes me about it is, with Trump, you really do see the emotional temperature changing. When the operation began with the Israelis, he was distancing himself from it. When he saw it succeed, he decided to pile on and he jumped in. And now that it's gone well, he is trying to extract maximum concessions. As you say, the most important question is, how are the Iranians going to react to all this? This was a very tough speech. It was basically saying, give up or else. And there was a threat in there, which is, if you don't concede, if you don't do what we tell you, there will be more strikes and there will be more targets. And the implication was very clearly that the United States will do it. So this is not the end of the American campaign. This is a pause, waiting to see how the Iranians respond. And we don't yet know how they're responding. One final thought about all this, Anderson, is, of course, it's also worth noting that the president used military force in a situation that cannot really be described as preemptive. There was no danger of an Iranian attack to the United States. And as many senators and congressmen have pointed out, including Republicans, the power to go to war against another country is lodged in the Constitution with Congress. And what President Trump has done, and he's done this in a variety of places, is really try to unshackle the executive branch from any constraints that he believes it operates under. This was a case of the President of the United States essentially attacking a foreign nation in an unprovoked way without any congressional authorization, not even a congressional resolution or motion, which sometimes, presidents seek even when it's not a formal declaration of war. So it'd be interesting to see whether there's any congressional reaction to all this.
Fareed, and we were told that he had given some advance notice to some members of Congress, not sure how many involved, but to your point, not perhaps what many in Congress wanted him to do, and said and spoke to that. Fareed, thanks very much. I'm here with Jeremy Diamond, Clarissa Ward. It really is now a question of, I guess, what Iran chooses to do, what Israel continues to choose to do, and it remains to be seen.
I just thought it was so striking. Fareed talked about it as a threat. I mean, essentially, President Trump was saying to Iran and to the Iranian regime and to the Ayatollah, if you want to survive, you take this one on the chin and you come back to the negotiating table. This is your chance now to survive. If you're going to fight, then we're going to have a problem. I mean, he said it's peace or tragedy. That's the choice that's being given. And I think it's worth, just for our viewers who are not poring over the minutiae of geopolitics every second hour of the day, to go through the different sort of proxies that Iran has at its disposal. The nearest one to here, of course, is Hezbollah in Lebanon, significantly weakened and degraded, did not get involved when Israel began its operations against Iran. Do they now feel pressured to do something, to respond in some kind of way? Because, by the way, Iran has been very clear that if the U.S. got involved, every American citizen and every American soldier in this entire region is a legitimate target in the eyes of Iran. Then you have the Houthis in Yemen. Obviously, they had cut a deal with the U.S. previously. All bets are off there now. So that's another one. Then you have one that we haven't talked about as much, Kataib Hezbollah, which is one of the proxies inside Iraq. I thought it was interesting as well that President Trump brought up those roadside bombs. Back in the days, the early invasion of Iraq, you had Muqtada al-Sadr, the famous Shia cleric with his militia, would attack U.S. soldiers with these EFPs, these molten copper roadside bombs that were absolutely lethal and wounded and killed many American soldiers. The very fact that he's bringing that up again, reminding us all of the various different proxies across this region who could well now be mobilized in a coherent or maybe sort of ad hoc way. And, you know, it's an extraordinary moment. It's a incredibly risky moment. Not to mention the whole sort of international law component of this, which we haven't even been able to get into. But it feels, honestly, akin to the sort of U.S. invasion of Iraq, not in terms of the scale of it, but in terms of the significance.
And we should also step back for a moment and just think about what has happened over the course of the last week, because this is an earthquake moment for the entire region. I mean, we have heard Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I've spoken with a lot of Israeli officials who have talked about this idea of reshaping the Middle East post-October 7th. I mean, they have effectively neutered the threat of Hezbollah, which at this very moment would be playing an enormously significant role in any kind of Iranian retaliation. We have seen what has happened to Hamas in Gaza, and now we have also watched as the Iranians have carried out ballistic missile strikes in Israel, but certainly, perhaps not to the level that Israeli officials had anticipated and expected. 50% of Iran's ballistic missile launchers have now been destroyed, and now Iran's entire nuclear program, according to the president at least, has now been destroyed, and the potential threat of any kind of decision by the Iranians to weaponize that nuclear program has now been taken off the table, at least for the time being. And this is just an entire reshaping of the Middle East, of the way in which Israel and the United States would be able to operate in such a region without such a significant threat from Iran. And President Trump, as you rightly point out, Clarissa, has now said to the Iranians, if you want to survive, you will come to the table and you will end this. And important to note, he also told them that he needs to they need to do it quickly. And so how long is the president going to give the Iranians now to address this issue, to form a kind of agreement here, and to be able to move forward and survive if that's the choice that they make?
Just, we're talking about this idea of reshaping the Middle East. I mean, I don't want to be a giant Debbie Downer here, but we've seen this movie before, yes. Right? Yeah. And it did not end well. And I'm not saying in this case that that's what's going to happen, but we need to keep in mind recent history, and the possible ramifications of this are huge.
There's a lot of moving parts to this. Brock Ravid is also joining us. Brock, I'm wondering what you made of the president's remarks, sending a very clear message to Iran. Essentially, you have a choice to make, and saying that the U.S. would keep attacking if they make the wrong one.
And I think the reason President Trump said that is because there's a real concern that now the Iranians will retaliate. They said several times in the last few days that if the U.S. Joins this war and attacks their nuclear facilities, they will retaliate against U.S. forces in the region, against U.S. interests, and there are a lot of those. There are U.S. bases in Qatar, in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia, in Bahrain. They are all in the range of Iran's missiles, and not even the long-range missiles. And the Iranians have thousands of short-range missiles that can reach those U.S. bases. And I think this is now the number one question. Are the Iranians going to launch this retaliation? Second, question number two, are the Iranians going to close the Strait of Hormuz? This is another threat they made. And closing the Strait of Hormuz would influence the entire commercial shipping in the Gulf. Much of it is oil and natural gas. This will get energy prices up. This will influence the entire world's economy. We're talking about 30% of the world's oil exports are moving through the Strait of Hormuz. This is a very serious situation that can develop out of this military strike tonight.
It also, the president has said very clearly that U.S. airstrikes completely and totally obliterated, those were his words, or having them on the screen, right, the nuclear sites. Do you think it's too soon to know that for sure? I mean, will it take, I mean, daylight is just now breaking here in Tel Aviv. Is it going to take a while to really assess the damage?
So I'll tell you, I asked a senior Israeli official who was sitting in the Israeli cabinet bunker while the U.S. bombers bombed the Iranian nuclear facilities. And he said that, first, it's too soon to know exactly what the results of the strikes are. But he said something more interesting, in my opinion, is that everything that happened in the last 10 days, the Israeli strikes and now the U.S. strikes, has taken the Iranian nuclear program several years back. And even if the Iranians will try and rebuild it, it will take time. And this senior Israeli official told me, if they try to rebuild it, we will come back again. And if we need, we will come back again. The same way the Israel is doing in Lebanon against Hezbollah, the same way it was trying to fight Iranian military entrenchment in Syria. That's the plan right now. The Iranians will have to choose if they're trying to rebuild the plan, this nuclear program, and then face potential strikes in the future to destroy it again.
So, Barak, if you are Israel today, do you continue air operations over Iran, or do you wait and see?
I'm not sure it's needed at the moment. Again, I don't know. The IDF always has more targets in Iran. They need to take out more and more missile launchers because the Iranians are going to retaliate, and there's a race between the number of missiles and missile launchers the Iranians have and the number of interceptors that the Israelis have. Therefore, I think the Israelis will continue to hunt down those missile launchers. But when it comes to nuclear facilities or other targets, I think more or less the big things the Israelis wanted to do, they did. And what they did not do, the U.S. Did tonight.
Isn't there concern about, or I don't know if you're hearing concern about the location of plutonium, the location of nuclear material? I had read that there were possibilities that a lot of that had been moved to sites that the IAEA may be unaware of, and that the U.S. and Israel may be unaware of.
Yeah, I think that's a major concern. You're talking about, the problem is that we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of kilograms of enriched uranium. This is not, some small amount of uranium that you put in a suitcase and take somewhere. We're talking about big stockpiles that I'm not sure that anybody who's not the Iranians know where it is right now. And this means that for a long time, we might not have clear information about where is Iran's enriched uranium. And to enrich uranium from 60% to 90%, which is what you need to build a nuclear bomb, you don't need thousands of centrifuges. You need a dozen centrifuges in some secret location somewhere in order to do it. That's, I think, the biggest threat. If the Iranians are capable to find a secret location where they can take the enriched uranium they still have, to take some centrifuges that they might still possess, put it all together, and try to dash for some sort of a nuclear device that they can detonate and show that they're capable. And obviously, if they will be able to do that, then the world will look completely different afterwards. So I think that's the biggest question right now. If the Iranians are going to, pull the brakes now and say, okay, we want a ceasefire, or on the other hand, push the gas and say, we're dashing for a bomb.
Barak, as somebody who has reported on this for so long and knows this region so well, can you just, and there's a lot of folks watching who don't follow this as closely as you have over the years, just how extraordinary is this moment right now?
I think it's regardless of whether you support a U.S. strike in Iran or you oppose a U.S. strike in Iran, there is no doubt that this is a historic night. There are, I think, at least 4 U.S. presidents that faced this moment of saying, what am I going to do with the Iranian nuclear program? Am I going to use military force to stop it? It was Bill Clinton, George Bush, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, and Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is the only one of those presidents who decided to take military action. And this will definitely be a major part of his legacy.
Barak Ravid, thank you very much. Brett McGurk, your thoughts after hearing from the president. Again, you have worked on this for a long, long time.
I think, Anderson, I've been reflecting on it, and Fareed is right that the statement up top about Iran and what this government is and what they've done, the number of Americans they've killed, I thought was right. I think it's important to remind the American people of that. Then it was kind of just stock thanking our allies. I think the level of coordination with the Israelis we've been talking about, I think it was really hand in glove. That was in the statement. But really, the most important thing here was a message to Iran. I mean, this was a very tough, reflective of what I think the private messaging has been. This could be it. But if you respond, the president literally said, we have many targets left. And I just say one final thing here. If anyone tells you, Anderson, they know where this is going, the good optimistic case or the most pessimistic, they have no idea what they're talking about. Nobody knows. I just think we got to step back, prepare for the worst, but work diplomatically for the best possible outcome and contain escalation. Overall, I have to say, I think it's a good thing for the world if Iran does not have these enrichment facilities, if this was successful. This has been a problem that's vexed us for so many years, but we have to see. But you're right there in the heart of it, Anderson, and Iran is going to have to make some decisions now over the next couple of days, and those will be truly fateful decisions.
If you were in a situation room and you were watching you're looking at the range of levers Iran has to pull if they want to attack the United States, attack Israel, respond in some way negatively to this attack, what levers do you think most likely, given the degradation we've seen in Hezbollah and Hamas and the change of regime in Syria?
So they have 3, and we know what they are. They're missiles, militias, and then terrorism, hostage taking. And that can go on for many years. Again, that's not new. Something we've been dealing with for Iran for decades. But on the missiles, Anderson, it's the short-range missiles of our personnel in the Gulf. Again, if Iran tries that, I suspect we have an immediate counter, and we have defenses in place, but that would be a go-to for Iran. And the militias, particularly in Iraq. They have a lot of proxy militias in Iraq. They've been in a ceasefire over the past year or so. I mentioned earlier, after October 7th, those militias came after us. 3 Americans were killed about a year ago. We had to fight back. We had to strike back, and they declared a ceasefire. So it's missiles, militias, and then their acts of terrorism and hostage taking. That's their go-to. And Barack said something right. There might be hardliners in the regime saying we should continue down that path. I suspect there's going to be other voices in Iran, particularly President Pezeshkian, who's a more moderate guy, saying, you know what, guys, maybe we have not been on the best strategic course here. So they're going to have a debate within their system, what's left of it right now, about how to proceed. But that was a very tough message from the president. Basically, this can end here. There can be peace or tragedy for Iran. That's what he said. And I suspect Iran will have to do something. But the kind of full-scale response that some might be predicting, I think it's going to be difficult for Iran to muster that. And what's so unprecedented here is that Israel controls the skies over Iran. So whatever Iran tries, we can counter significantly. It's
Well, let me ask you about
that's
that
my immediate
because
message.
the IDF said a couple days ago they've eliminated half of the launchers for missiles. I don't know if that's the ballistic missiles, the long-range missiles. I don't know if that includes also the shorter-range missiles, which you're talking about, which is what they could use against U.S. forces in the region. I guess my question is, those shorter-range missiles, are they easier to launch? Do they require the kind of transportation and in some cases these longer-range missiles or these ballistic missiles require? Because Israel has effectively destroyed the trucks that carry missiles to the launchers. These shorter range missiles, is that something that Israel controlling the air can target and continue to target?
Yes, Anderson, and I suspect that's been going on the past 8 days. Let me say something about this, and I'm going to be careful because I was involved in this not long ago. But this war plan against Iran and the strike that was done tonight had a number of elements to it. One of the elements was you have to eliminate the air defense the best you can, and you want to eliminate missile capabilities to degrade Iran's ability to respond. I think Israel's been doing a lot of that work over the last 8 days. And I expect as we learn more, the level of coordination between the Israeli military and ours on targets and everything, as we've been working this problem for years, has been quite high. So I don't know exactly what Iran's capabilities are. I know they are certainly far less than they were 9 days ago, but they still have them. And, we have good missile defenses, and we've moved a lot of personnel, as we talked earlier. But again, that's the go-to for Iran. It's missiles, militias, and terrorism. And this is the Iran we've been dealing with for some time. But they have a big choice to make because the president was very clear. This can be it, or we already have the targets picked for a more destructive response. So this is that escalation ladder that you're always on at something like this. And in military parlance, sometimes talk about turns. One side takes a turn, another takes a turn. This is a big turn from the United States of America. Iran has to choose. Is it now going to make another turn? And if they do, I suspect the United States military is prepared with a fairly significant counter. But let's hope that can be contained and you don't start going up that ladder. And that's where this diplomacy we mentioned earlier in the night, Anderson, and I think it's borne out from what you and I discussed a couple hours ago. Immediate message was sent to Iran saying, this is about the nuclear facilities. This is it. It can end here. Or if you make the wrong choice, it won't. But that message is being repeated by regional partners who are in touch with the Iranians, I understand. And the objective is to counter and contain that escalation risk.
Brett, just one final question. The decision-making, Supreme Leader has oversight and kind of a big picture. Given, I assume, his security requirements right now of trying to not get killed and probably making communication difficult, how long do you expect? I mean, who makes those decisions? And it's not like they can all go to the Situation Room and now just discuss it like they would at the White House. I assume this is more laborious now to communicate between the Supreme Leader and the various people in the Revolutionary Guard and elsewhere who are still alive. How long do you think it takes to make a decision?
Yeah, that's why, Anderson, that the kind of a coordinated full spectrum response from Iran, I think, is very unlikely. But, they have planned for this too. So they probably have some immediate responses. But again, I'm going back to missiles. The missiles are degraded, have already been hit. Their militias in Iraq might have broad freedom of maneuver now to take some shots at us. But you're absolutely right. I mean, this is what is so extraordinary. First, the president made clear something Clarissa basically mentioned earlier, that the Supreme Leader is only alive because Donald Trump has chosen to keep him alive. That's something the president said a week ago. I bet that was a coordinated message. And they have eliminated the commander of the Iranian military, General Bagheri, the commander of the missile force, General Hajizadeh, the commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, General Salami, the commander of the Quds Force, Eshmal Ghani, and so on, and some of their deputies. So the whole structure has been removed over the last 9 days.
Yeah.
So the idea that Iran is going to meet
I'm sorry, Brett. I got Fred Playton on the phone from Tehran again. It's just hard to get communication, so I just want to jump into him. Fred, we heard from the president. I don't know if anybody in Iran heard from him. I don't know if that would be carried, probably not carried on Iran state TV. What are you seeing? What are you hearing today, right now?
Yeah, first of all, it wasn't carried on Iran state TV, but the Iranians now coming out with condemnation. First of all, acknowledging that these strikes took place, Anderson. The Iranian Atomic Energy Agency came out and condemned this in the fullest, called it a savage attack. They also vowed to continue their nuclear program. That's sort of one of the big messages that they're trying to send. They call this against international law. They also accuse the International Atomic Energy Agency of being complicit in all of this. But the big key line from Iran's Atomic Energy Organization is they are vowing to continue Iranian atomic energy and their nuclear program as well. And we've also heard from several regional officials who have confirmed that attacks have taken place, that there were incursions, as they put it, into the airspaces over all three of those nuclear facilities, Fordo, Esfahan, and Natanz. Right now, of course, it's still the early morning hours. We have heard, since the last time we spoke, a couple of thuds around the Iranian capital, so it's unclear whether or not there might still be other airstrikes going on by the Israeli military, and maybe the Iranians responding to that. Of course, over the past night, there has been a noted increase in air activity here over the Iranian capital. We've heard the air defenses and seen the air defenses, quite frankly, jump into action numerous times in the night hours. We've seen bursts from anti-aircraft guns in the skies as well. So it certainly did seem as though there was more going on above the Iranian capital, but of course no one could have known that this mission ordered by President Trump was going to happen. The Iranians so far, the government has not made a statement. It's just been the energy organization so far. But the governors, the local governors of the regions where these nuclear facilities are located, those governments there have put out statements confirming that that some sort of attack is taking place, obviously condemning those attacks, as well as the Iranians have said that there could be major consequences to that. The Iranians, of course, also saying, Anderson, I think it's a key point, that despite the fact that a lot of people from their military leadership had been taken out by the Israelis over the past couple of days, that the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps does have a propensity and a capability to renew their ranks. There were replacements were put in place very quickly. They say their military is functioning. They keep pointing to the fact that there are still a lot of missile attacks going on onto Israeli territory. They also say that the fact that it's fewer missile strikes that are going on by the Iranians is due to the fact that they're using higher quality missiles instead of larger quantity. But they certainly do say that those missile forces are still capable and that their military leadership is still very much intact, Anderson.
Hey, Fred, just the headline, who was it or what organization within Iran was saying that they will continue their nuclear program?
That was the Iranian Atomic Energy Organization that put out a statement calling this a savage attack, saying that it was against international law, saying or calling the International Atomic Energy Agency complicit in all this, and also vowing that this will not deter, as they put it, nuclear energy and the development of Iran's nuclear energy program in the future. Of course, the Iranians, and it's something we have to stress because they stress it all the time, they continue to say that their nuclear program is only for peaceful purposes. They believe that it is a right that they have that no one can take from them. And they have been vowing to continue that nuclear program no matter what the United States does. So this is something, you know, we've been here on the ground over the past couple of days, and every single official that we've been speaking to says the same thing, says this program will continue in some way, shape, or form, that they'll definitely pick up the pieces. They believe it's their right. And even when you when I speak to officials now, when I ask them, the Trump administration says that Iran can't have nuclear enrichment. They continue to now even say that that is a red line for them, that enrichment will continue even if it's on a much lower level. Of course, we have to see what the reaction to these strikes is going to be, but the Iranians certainly saying that for them, the nuclear program is a red line. Enrichment is also something they say that they will continue to do in the future, Anderson.
Right. And I guess the question now, of course, is what are their capabilities to do that? And also, where's the location of some of the nuclear material? Was it still in these facilities, or was it spread out around the country? We don't have answers to that. I understand we have some new photos from inside the Situation Room. If we can put those up, seeing these for the first time. There you see Marco Rubio, you see President Trump, you see Pete Hegseth there on the left, Vice President Vance. We're not sure at what stage of the operation these photos were taken, but these now just being released by the White House. Clarissa, and Jeremy Diamond here with me in Tel Aviv. Dawn has come. No air raid sirens so far here in Tel Aviv. That's good news. Hearing from Fred that the atomic organization is pledging to continue their program, that's probably not encouraging news to the White House or to anybody.
No, I mean, I think we have to be realistic that there will be some bluster and some braggadocio in the coming days, and we don't necessarily need to take it all literally, because some of that will be intended for domestic consumption within Iran. We've also heard, I should mention, from the Houthis, the militant group in Yemen. They've said, quote, that Trump must bear the consequences. Again, not clear what those consequences would be, but we have seen them firing ballistic missiles towards Israel. We have also seen them hijacking ships in the Red Sea. I did read this very interesting commentary from Kareem Sajapur, who you probably know well. He's one of the real experts on Iran, works with the Carnegie Endowment, and he talked about, and I think we've hit on it again and again this evening, but just the extraordinary thing about this moment is how little we know about what comes next and how it could literally go in either direction. He wrote, what happened tonight could either entrench the regime or hasten its demise. It could prevent a nuclear Iran, or it could accelerate one. But one thing he said, which I would be inclined to agree with, that I also thought was worth mentioning, is this idea that it is more likely to open a new chapter than to end it. So as much as the White House is projecting this idea of we're going to draw a line under it now, right? New chapter, new page, let's start again. I think realistically, even if this does end up in the long term having a positive impact on some level, this is a new chapter now, and we have no idea what it entails.
And you also have to think about the years and the millions and hundreds of millions of dollars that the Iranian regime spent on this nuclear program. How much they have staked on this program, even just from a domestic politics standpoint. I mean, this is an incredibly embarrassing moment for the Iranian regime to see these three sites, according to President Trump at least, destroyed in one fell swoop with these strikes. They are going to need to find a way to save face here. And does that entail these significant attacks that we have been anticipating potentially against U.S. troops in the region? Does it entail significant attacks against Israel, where we are right now? And how do they move forward? And so this is an incredibly volatile moment. As much as we were talking before about the way in which this is, earth-shattering and changing the face of the region potentially, we don't know which direction things are going to go in. And this is a very delicate moment for Israel and also for U.S. troops and civilians in the region as well.
Kylie Atwood is standing by. Kylie, I understand you have new reporting on U.S. diplomats in the region.
Yeah, so what we're learning as you guys are talking about the potential Iran retaliation, we don't know what that will look like or when it will come, but the U.S. Embassy in Iraq and the U.S. consulate in Erbil. Both of those are undergoing a pretty dramatic drawdown as we speak. There are flights that are leaving Iraq. Earlier this evening, they were actually halted for some time because there are questions right now about the airspace in this area, as you can imagine, Anderson. But as the United States is drawing down its presence from the U.S. diplomatic posts in Iraq, we should note that they're not completely drawing down. There's set to be still a skeletal diplomatic presence, I'm told, that will be left there. This began 10 days ago. That was when the United States made moves. President Trump said it was because the region could become dangerous that they started drawing down their non-essential personnel who were based in Iraq. So there was already some indication when that happened that the United States had reason to believe that something was coming here. This was obviously before Israel started its operation against Iran. And so now what we're watching for is what the United States does with its other diplomatic posts in the region, and also if it offers any support to Americans who are concerned about what this could turn into and want to leave. We know that the State Department is providing some support for Americans who are in Israel right now to actually leave the country. We don't know exactly how many of them have actually gotten on those flights, but this is a very dynamic situation, and rest assured that people at the State Department are really monitoring every single intelligence tidbit that they get to make these decisions about what the force posture, what the diplomatic posture should look like in the region.
Yeah. I can tell you there's a lot of Americans who are very frustrated right now here in Tel Aviv, and I'm sure elsewhere in Israel, who would like to get out, who are finding it very hard to get information out of this embassy. People literally coming up to me on the street asking me for advice on how to get out. It's very difficult for people, it seems like, to get straight answers and to get flights organized or even boats, whatever it may be. There's a lot of concern about Israelis traveling, people with dual citizenship traveling through Jordan or traveling through Egypt overland for understandable reasons. I want to bring in General Wesley Clark, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander. General Clark, your thoughts on this operation, what we've learned about it, the questions that still remain about is President Trump correct that this has been completely destroyed? Exactly what may remain? How do you see it?
Well, no surprise about the B-2 strikes in terms of their ability to hit the target. Of course, we don't know what they have actually done to the target. Natanz, Isfahan, seems like they could well have obliterated it. We don't know about Fordow. Maybe they have. We also, as you all were saying, Anderson, we don't know about where the nuclear materials really are. The Iranians have said they've already taken them out of these sites. They're distributed around the country and so forth. So we just don't know. It is, as Clarissa Ward was saying, a very, very volatile and uncertain time. I just hope that the president will use the momentum and the dominance that he has achieved to really push this regime. I hope we're not going into another argument that we had on Friday with the Europeans of, you won't enrich, yes we will enrich, no you won't, yes we will, because this really isn't about enrichment, is it? It's really about a state that has dedicated the last 40 plus years to the destruction of another state in the region. And this is the chance to really push for a redefinition by Iran of their purpose, whether that's a regime change or a backing away from what they previously said, but it should go deeper than simply trying to avoid escalation dominance and hope we can restore the situation that we had before. It's about trying to move to, as Clarissa said, a new chapter. And that new chapter needs to be that Iran has given up trying to destroy Israel. If we can get to that point, so much in the region can be made so much better. And President Trump has a unique opportunity that no president has had before to really affect dramatic change in the region. The U.S. military is very competent. Sure, it has those targets. I don't expect the military to do anything in the next 24, 48 hours. We are going to have to wait probably on the Iranian response. But I do hope that we have people working underneath this, talking to lower level people inside Iran and getting their sense of things. And maybe there are people inside Iran who say, enough of this old regime. Let's change the direction of Iran now, save the civilization that we have, and move forward in harmony with the rest of the region.
Yeah, General Clark, I appreciate your time tonight. In the minute or the 2 minutes or so we have left, I just want to go back to Brett McGurk. Brett, you've worked on this in government through multiple administrations, and I'm just wondering, on a personal level, what is it like to see what's happened tonight and to think about what lies ahead?
Good question, Anderson. My immediate thought goes back to where you're standing and what happened in Israel on October 7th. And in those days and hours, it was so fraught. And honestly, as Iran joined this multi-front campaign against Israel, Israel's existence and how it was going to come out of this was very much at stake. We went to Israel with President Biden about a week after that attack, and just an incredibly difficult, I just can't, it's hard to find the words right now. But what has happened from then until now has been a human tragedy on so many levels. We mentioned Gaza. We have to get that ceasefire in place, get the hostages out, but also what Israel has done. And frankly, yes, the U.S. supported Israel in its defense throughout this entire period. I believe strongly we were right to do so. And it has now led to, I think, where we are, which is extraordinary with knocking out Hezbollah, mentioned the Assad regime, everything else, and now Iran being where it is, with Israel effectively controlling Iran's skies. However, that's all very tactical. The strategic equation is open. And I think Kareem's tweet thread that was just mentioned on air is excellent. I think that's the point I mentioned about 5 minutes ago. If anyone tells you they know exactly where this is going, they don't know what they're talking about. But I do believe that the world is a safer place without these enrichment facilities in Iran. And Iran made just terrible decisions in putting these advanced centrifuges into Fordo and basically telling the IAEA, we're going to continue to escalate our program and what you say. I've told Iranians in talks in Oman, if you keep this up, guys, it's going to be taken care of one way or the other. And here we are. So this is a lot of blowback and decisions Iran has made over the years.
Well, Brett, I appreciate you being with us over these hours and these last 10 days. We were on the air together when this all began. I'm Anderson Cooper in Tel Aviv. CNN special live coverage continues right now with Wolf Blitzer after a quick break.
To understand the world, we need to know the truth. And that's why we follow the facts, wherever they lead, no matter how far we have to go.
Live Aid, when rock and roll took on the world. Premieres July 13th on CNN.
There are days I feel stuck in my head. Even on an antidepressant, lingering depression symptoms can make it hard to break through. I wanted more from my antidepressant. I asked about Vraylar. Adding Vraylar to an antidepressant significantly reduces overall depression symptoms better than an antidepressant alone.
Vraylar isn't approved for elderly patients with dementia-related psychosis due to increased risk of death or stroke. Report changes in behavior or suicidal thoughts to your doctor. Antidepressants can increase these in children and young adults. Report fever, stiff muscles or confusion which may be life-threatening, or uncontrolled muscle movements which may be permanent. High blood sugar which can lead to coma or death. Weight gain and high cholesterol may occur. Difficulty moving, tremors, slow or uncontrolled body movements, restlessness and feeling like you need to move, nausea, constipation, insomnia, dizziness, increased appetite, and fatigue are common. Side effects may not appear for weeks.
Vraylar. Breaking through to relief. Ask about Vraylar.
You found it then.
Of course I did. Good boy.
and so forth. We're gonna deal with this. The enemy's never dead. These people never stop. This is what I try to tell people. You talk about forever wars. Good versus evil is forever.
Mark Levin, the great one. We appreciate it. We'll be watching you tomorrow. That's all the time we have left this evening. Thank God that the world is a safer place tonight. Please stay with the Fox News channel all night long for continuing coverage of the incredibly successful U.S. strike against Iran's nuclear facilities. Trace Gallagher is next. Thank God. Have a great night.
And good evening. I'm Trace Gallagher. It's 11 p.m. on the East Coast, 8 o'clock here in Los Angeles, and 6 a.m. in Israel, a country that just got a huge lift from the United States in its fight against Iran, after the U.S. successfully attacked the very core of Iran's nuclear infrastructure. Welcome to a special breaking news edition of America's Late News, Fox News at Night.
Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated.
President Trump addressing the nation moments ago after what the president calls a historic and successful strike on 3 nuclear sites inside Iran, including Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordow. There is word tonight the U.S. used 6 of those bunker buster bombs on the Fordow site alone, and fired dozens of Tomahawk missiles at the Natanz and Isfahan sites. Now the world waits to see how Iran responds.
Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier.
Iranian television saying that any American target is legitimate, but the U.S. saying there is a plan in place to protect every American in the region. So Iranian proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis are badly compromised. Their top military leaders are dead. Their missile bases decimated. And now their nuclear sites are reportedly finished. We have live Team Fox coverage. The Chief National Security
President, CIA Director, Defense Secretary, Secretary of State, all in the Situation Room, not pictured Tulsi Gabbard. It's very notable, Trace, that when President Trump walked out to give this address to the nation after these strikes, he was flanked by his Secretary of State, Defense Secretary, and Vice President. Remember, there has been some reports of infighting in the administration, as you can see there. Instead, he clearly was showing that his team was in lockstep over these strikes, which were held under unprecedented secrecy. It was just earlier we saw that flight of B-2 stealth bombers heading west from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri early this morning. Turns out those were just decoys. The real strike package was heading east, and we heard from our own Sean Hannity that 6 bunker-busting bombs were dropped. Each of those B-2 bombers only carries 2 of them, and it's notable. Strikes is to ensure that Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. And these kind of strikes have taken place before. Recall in his first term, Trace, that he launched cruise missile strikes in Syria in 2017 and 2018. And again, the biggest was when he took out Iran's most powerful general, Qasem Soleimani. And recall, there was some blowback. Iran did retaliate days later, launching over a dozen ballistic missiles at Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq, where most of the U.S. forces that are based in Iraq were. And so there's no question from U.S. officials who tell me that they are bracing for some kind of Iranian response. We'll wait and see what that response is. But President Trump warned, if Iran seeks peace, there will be peace. But if they want to do battle, he said the U.S. military is ready to strike again, Trace.
Lucas Tomlinson live for us at the White House. Lucas, we'll get back to you as any news warrants. You have a live look there at the White House. Any news that comes out of there, we will bring it to you. Meantime, let's go to the Middle East. let's go to the Middle East and Trey Yingst, our chief foreign correspondent there, and get the latest on what's happening in Tel Aviv. Trey.
Yeah, Trace, good evening. Following these American strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities, Israel is bracing for the possibility of more Iranian retaliation. This country has seen 9 days of ballistic missile fire. So far, it has been quiet following the strikes, but there are new instructions for Israel's Home Front Command going to the civilian population here, indicating there will be no public gatherings. They had previously lifted some of these rules, allowing people to go to the beach or to go to cafes and other businesses. Other shops will be closed. The airspace over this country is set to remain closed. There were some evacuation flights supposed to take off today. They will not be happening anymore. Israel understands that Iran has it in its sights and could continue to launch more missiles into this country. Now, moving forward here, we did get some reaction tonight from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who said in a second statement, quote, "Immediately after the operation was completed, President Trump called me. It was a very warm, very moving conversation." He went on to say President Trump is leading the free world with courage. He is a tremendous friend of Israel like no other before him. I spoke with an Israeli security source tonight who indicated similar sentiment, saying people were cheering, adding that it was a euphoric and historic moment and that there is a sense of relief among the population and also the security echelon here, understanding that the Fordow facility, Isfahan and Natanz were among some of the most hardened and difficult facilities for the Israelis to strike. But given the fact they were able to clear a path forward, taking out the country's air defense systems, taking out top IRGC officials, and weakening the ballistic missile supply, this has given Israel the ability to continue to operate inside Iran, and then ultimately given the United States the ability to go after these key nuclear facilities. Trace.
What about the missiles coming in today, Trey? It seems like I heard you earlier say that they had greatly lessened.
Yeah, absolutely. The country of Israel has extensive air defense systems. They have both the Arrow 2 and 3 system. They have the David Sling. They're also using American systems out at sea and here on the ground, including the Patriot system and at least one THAAD system. And so they have the ability to not only shoot down this incoming fire, but more importantly for the Israeli people, the army has the ability to go after the launching positions inside of Iran. And according to IDF officials, around two-thirds of the people two-thirds of the launchers have been taken out in Israeli strikes. And so it just gives you a sense of how Israel continues to control the skies over Iran. They can take care of many of these threats before they're actually launched toward Israeli cities or population centers, and then they're able to mitigate that threat. We do expect there will be more in the future, but like I said earlier, the risk is far lower than it was in many of the days before. Trace?
Yeah. Trey Yingst, we'll get back to you. Stand by. Thank you. Meantime, let's get back to this country and the Washington. The chief national security correspondent, Jennifer Griffin, is live for us at the Pentagon. Jennifer.
Well, Trace, I think what's so extraordinary about tonight's strikes, not only all eyes were on Fordow, and for the past week we've been talking about the B-2 bombers and the massive ordnance penetrators. Those are the 30,000-pound GBU-57 bunker buster bombs. What we can report tonight, after Sean Hannity spoke to the president, we learned that there were 6 massive ordnance penetrators dropped on Fordow. And as the president wrote on Truth Social, that Fordow site is gone. My sources tell me that those bunker buster bombs would have been dropped through the air ventilation shafts at Fordow. So most likely 3 bunker busters through each of those shafts. We had been focusing on the entrances. There are 2 entrances to the Fordow site, which is 300 feet underground. We've also reported that the MOP bomb can penetrate about 200 feet underground, but they work in pairs. The B-2 bomber, which flew out of Whiteman Air Force Base, they fly nonstop and are refueled along the way to this site at Fordow. They drop one MOP bomb, a 30,000-pound bomb that goes about 200 feet down. There's soil that is then removed, exposed, and then the second bomb, which drops into a hole that is has a radius of about 25 feet. it goes into the same hole and can go even deeper. So Fordow, we understand, is gone. That is significant because that was the main nuclear enrichment site, and it was deeply fortified in that mountain. But then there are the two other sites. You have Natanz, which had 3 underground enrichment facilities. Those 3, we understand that 30 Tomahawk missiles were fired from U.S. submarines about 400 miles away from these sites, the sites at Isfahan and Natanz. Those U.S. submarines were most likely Ohio-class converted guided missile subs. Most likely the USS Georgia or Florida were involved in those strikes. What I'm being told, though, is at Isfahan is an even harder target than Fordow. We hadn't talked about it as much this week because all the focus was on the B-2s and the MOP bombs and Fordow. But Isfahan is where the uranium hexafluoride is, where the centrifuges are made. And my understanding is there is a tunnel into the mountain there, and it is much, much deeper than at Fordow. And so we will have to wait and see the bomb damage assessment at that site to see how whether it was completely destroyed. I'm told from very, very knowledgeable sources that that was most likely the hardest site. So we'll have to see.
I know we're still getting new information coming in here, Jennifer, but just for kind of clarification here, we have been told, or we've been kind of reporting that the B-2s went in and they went into Fordow and may have dropped as many as 6 of the bunker busters, and there were as many as 30 Tomahawks fired at Natanz and Isfahan. And I'm wondering, do we know, have we ruled out the possibility of any bunker busters being used on Isfahan and on Natanz?
I'm told that the bunker busters were used at Fordow and that it was the Tomahawks that targeted Natanz and Isfahan. So at this point in time, you would have had at least 3 B-2 bombers there above Fordow. Again, when we woke up this morning, all eyes were on the reports and the sightings, the radar trackers, the flight trackers who saw that there were those 6 B-2 bombers flying towards Guam. And now if you were to fly from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri all the way to Iran, let's say, that's a 30-hour straight flight. So those bombers could not possibly have been involved in this strike. That's when we look at what would have been flying east. Clearly, some B-2 bombers from Whiteman flew east, and that's why we saw this week about 30 air refuelers that were positioned in Europe and along the way and throughout the Middle East, because they would have been required to create an air refueling bridge to get those B-2s. It's a 15-hour flight if you go east from Whiteman to Fordow. And so those bombers would have flown east, and they would have been refueled along the way, and they would be on their way back home to Whiteman as we speak, Trace.
Jennifer Griffin, we'll get back to you. Jennifer, thank you. Let's bring in California Republican gubernatorial candidate Steve Hilton, host of the Aaron Cohen Show podcast, Israeli Special Ops veteran Aaron Cohen, star of Netflix Skin Decision Before and After, board certified plastic surgeon Dr. Sheila Nazarian, former Navy SEAL who trained with Israeli Defense Force soldiers in Israel, Cameron Hamilton, host of Stackelbeck Tonight, Eric Stackelbeck, Foundation for the Defense of Democracy CEO Mark Dubowitz, and retired U.S. Navy Rear Admiral and FDD Senior Fellow Mark Montgomery. Thank you all for coming on. I want to start at the table if I can first, because I want to get some reaction. Sheila Nazarian, your parents are Iranian. You talk about many times in this show how they left and the conditions they left in. You have contacts still in Iran. What is the feeling inside Iran tonight? What's the reaction?
I think that it's a mixture of hope and thankfulness to America and to Israel for what is being done. But I think there's also fear. There are bombs dropping on Iran, and I want to tell the Iranian people, we love you. We are praying for you. We are rooting for you. And this war is not against the Iranian people. This war is against this oppressive, bully regime that has been causing havoc in the Middle East for the last 46 years.
Yeah, it's amazing to me, Aaron Cohen, because you keep hearing from Iran, Iranian television, from some of the Iranian leaders, the mullahs, saying that any American target is legitimate tonight. America has they set a plan in place to keep every American in the region safe, but it sounds like it's going to go on. It's not going to end.
לא לשכוח את השפה של המזרח התיכון, של השכון. We cannot forget that language of the Middle East. Iran will strike back, but Iran needs to be careful, Trace, to regulate its flex. If Iran does anything that's beyond over-reflexing, they're going to find themselves in a situation where not only can they lose their nuclear program in about 20 minutes, but they can lose their entire regime, and Iran doesn't want to lose their regime. So I do think there's going to be a reflexive response. I think it's going to be proxies. I think it's going to be some cyber. I think there could be some potential missile launches again at Israel. However, a message has been sent. You are vulnerable. And to the people of Iran, like Sheila just spoke to, the people of Iran now see how vulnerable the mullahs are. The United States didn't wait 2 weeks. They went in there. They put a bomb, 6 bombs, right into the core of your symbolic nuclear program, Fordow, and we did it. We didn't blink, and every pilot got out safely. Yep. And so be careful, tread lightly, but just know that this can be escalated by the United States and by Israel very, very quickly. The hard work's already been done.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me like Iran's resources and assets have been greatly diminished. We're going to talk more about that. But the political perspective of this, Steve Hilton, to me, the president came out, he spoke for a little over a minute. He kind of came out, he said his piece, boom, and he was gone. You have Democrats that are already calling for impeachment. They're saying it's illegal, so on and so forth. You have Republicans that are largely in favor of this. In fact, I mean, there's a few Republicans who are somewhat reticent, the fact that, but largely in favor. This looks like a major political victory at this point in time for him, Steve.
Yes. There's no question about that, I think, Trace. I mean, these decisions are incredibly difficult for any leader. Just think what the president has been through, weighing up the options. Only he can make the decision. And he made the decision. And he made it after giving Iran every opportunity to avoid this. And they didn't. And he made the decision, unlike previous leaders who set red lines and then ignored them. And what you're seeing here, I think, is exactly why so many people saw President Trump as a breath of fresh air. He is not an ideologue, never has been. He always has been a problem-solving, pragmatic leader who just wants to fix the problem, whatever it is, without recourse to ideology. He's never been jingoistic and gung-ho about this. He said he wants peace, but he's also said very clearly Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, and that is part of peace. And he's acted on that. And whatever uncertainty there may be, and there's a lot of uncertainty about what comes in the days and weeks ahead, one thing is really clear tonight, that it's certain that America now projects strength around the world, and that every regime that wants to cause trouble around the world, every dangerous regime or potential dangerous regime knows that when President Trump speaks, he means it, and he will act on it and follow through. That is a huge positive result, not just for all of us here, but for the whole world.
And it's interesting to me, Eric Stakelbeck, to bring you into the conversation here. It's interesting because you have Iranian television, you have some of the mullahs issuing statements saying every American in the region, every American for that case across the board is a legitimate target tonight. But on the flip side of this, you have President Trump saying, listen, if they bring a fight to us, we're gonna continue the fight. But he's not talking about boots on the ground. He's not talking about regime change. He is actually doing the opposite and talking about diplomacy, saying it's time for Iran to come to the table and let's work this out diplomatically.
Yeah, Trace, I think if the regime dares strike American bases, President Trump will unleash hell. And I really think this is a Churchillian moment. President Trump and Bibi Netanyahu are modern-day Churchills. Trace, think about it. I really compare it to the 1980s, when you had Ronald Reagan, you had Pope John Paul II, Margaret Thatcher working together to bring down the Soviet empire. Here we have in 2025, Bibi, Trump working together to bring down the Iranian axis. And look, Bibi had the vision. He was talking about this 25 years ago. President Trump came down the escalator 10 years ago. They had the vision. They saw the gathering storm. They had the guts, the courage, the boldness, the conviction to do something about it. So kudos to President Trump, Prime Minister Netanyahu. And by the way, all those reports of them not being on the same page were clearly greatly exaggerated. Israel and the U.S. are very much coordinated in bringing down the Iranian nuclear menace.
I want to bring in Mark Dubowitz if I can here, because it's interesting. Yesterday, Mark, you had the Ayatollah Khamenei saying that there would be no surrender, period. Was not going to do it. And I'm wondering if that feeling has changed. I'm wondering what the next step is, what tomorrow brings diplomatically in your mind. Do you think it takes a few days before there's any type of response, Mark, or do you think this is something that is already kind of fomenting in Iran as we speak?
Supreme leader who, with the Iranian president at the time, Rafsanjani, went to Ayatollah Khomeini in the Iran-Iraq war. They had fought a brutal war with Iraq, 8 years, 1 million Iranians and Iraqis had been killed. The United States accidentally shot down an Iranian civilian passenger airline and promised compensation, apologized. But Khamenei and Rafsanjani went to Khomeini and said, the United States is about to intervene militarily on behalf of the Iraqis. We have to sue for peace. And they told Khomeini, who famously said, I drank the poison chalice, and he agreed to a ceasefire. Well, that was Khamenei 40 years ago. Khamenei today is in a bunker. And the United States has just intervened militarily, not accidentally, but intentionally. And he's got to be asking himself, do I drink the poison chalice? Do I go back to Amman with my diplomats and agree to the peaceful deal that President Trump has repeatedly offered me? Or am I going to fight my last stand? And I think President Trump made it very clear tonight. Actually, it surprised me that this isn't just about the nuclear sites, that if you escalate and you don't go back to a peaceful agreement, we are going to use the U.S. military to go after other military and security targets. So Khamenei is facing a choice between his survival and his nuclear program. He's told the nuclear program get almost obliterated tonight. He's got to be asking himself about his survival.
Yeah, it's interesting, Cameron Hamilton, because it kind of takes us full circle back to the argument that we ended Aaron Cohen with there, which is that Iran is in trouble. I mean, we talked about their military leaders being taken out when this battle between Israel and Iran first started. We talk about their air bases, their missile bases now being taken out. We talk about their nuclear infrastructure being taken out, and their proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis. You know, these are groups that are decimated, and in some instances, in some reports, have the Hezbollah leaders saying, no thanks, we want nothing to do with this. It seems to me like Iran is really looking for some cards to play somewhere.
I think that's a fair assessment, Trace. Iran traditionally has held on to a lot of its resources and infrastructure at home while pushing elements out into its proxies to effectively act as its arm overseas. What we're seeing now is that infrastructure being attacked and dismantled, a very symbolic gesture of the Trump administration. I do think from a military strategy perspective, while there's many arguments about whether or not this will create greater conflict in the region, this was probably the best case scenario given the examples. As a former commando, I can tell you fights on the ground, in the trenches, in cities and urban metropolitan areas, like what you saw with the Russians in the Battle of Grozny, like what we saw with Kuwait, like what we also saw in Fallujah and many other places. This is a grueling and complex war that takes a long time. So by using the resources here, dismantling some of their home-based infrastructure, you've also demonstrated very clearly to those proxy groups that Iran normally has operated with a lot of decentralized command. Now they don't have that same capability. They don't have the same bravado, nor do they have the actual same resources to fund those organizations.
It's amazing to me if we can bring in Mark Montgomery. Admiral, thank you for coming on the show. We appreciate it. I mean, nobody can give us perspective like you can. When you look at the mission overall, and on the left-hand side of the screen, we are using some of these satellite images. We still don't know the totality of the damage that actually happened on the ground in Isfahan as you go through Fordo and Natanz and so on and so forth. But when you see the mission described to you, Admiral, you have got to be proud. You have got to think, wow, this thing was precise.
You know, I agree completely, Trace. I think it showed both a good, deliberate plan from the United States. I mean, a good mix of both air and naval assets. And, you know, that Air Force mission, you know, is a complex one, the delivery of a unique piece of ordnance that's only been used really in a testing capacity in the past, mixed with a more traditional weapon, the Tomahawk fired from the submarines. I think the other bit of integration we have to acknowledge here is how well the Israeli Defense Forces and the U.S. Central Command have integrated. So General Carrillo, working with his IDF partners, we knew exactly what the IDF had done at Natanz and Esfahan. They'd taken out about 75% of each of those targets. We hit the rest of those targets, and we took probably, Esfahan was called inoperable a few days ago. I would now say it's much more fully destroyed. So this combination of U.S. and Israeli, this integration, both in intel sharing and planning and target selection, I mean, that is an impressive event, and I think General Carrillo at Central Command deserves a lot of the credit for that.
I want to come back to the table very quickly, Aaron Cohen, to you, because it brings back a great point, which is if they go after these sites from the air, which they did, and Israel has been primarily coming from the air, I'm wondering, because we have seen so many instances where you had Mossad, you had people from Israel inside Iran on many occasions. I'm wondering if there, you think, might be a plan for Israelis to be on the ground in some capacity in Iran to be able to check out these sites, to see if there's anything left that needs to be taken care of. Is there a plan, you think, for something like that?
I think that intelligence operations inside of Iran have been ongoing for years. I think they're continuously ongoing now. I wouldn't be surprised if there were reconnaissance elements on the ground. Look, with Israel, Trace, it's showtime. Israel doesn't have the luxury of not being good. So I wouldn't be surprised if Israel's got multiple sets of IRGC uniforms, scientist uniforms, civilian vehicles that date all the way back to Entebbe by way of deception. So those intelligence assets in Mossad, Unit 8200, different special operations elements from Seret Matkal, which is another elite unit. I believe that they've been in there for a long time. They will continue to be in there for a long time. There's a lot of intelligence reporting in real time that had to be coordinated in order for those 6 monster bunker busters to hit that Fordo site, which meant that the coordination was massive. So to what the Admiral was saying, it all gets diluted onto a giant map that creates that precision to be able to get those bombs to hit accurately and to be able to coordinate that airspace with the intelligence, with the assets on the ground. This is months of preparation, Trace. And I think that 2-week window from Trump wasn't to buy Iran time. I think it was to give Israel and the general from CENTCOM enough time to get their ducks lined up.
It's a great segue because we're going to bring in former B-2 pilot Mark Wetherington. It really is. I mean, very few people have flown these pieces of equipment, which are magnificent beyond questioning. And I'm wondering, Mark, if you can give us an idea of how precise this mission had to be to do the job they did today.
Well, Trace, certainly the complex target at Fordo demanded incredible accuracy, and the B-2 is a unique platform. No one else in the world has this type of capability. It's coupled with the navigation solution on the airplane and the weapon to make it the most precise weapon we could employ. And so when you're trying to go that deep, that precise at Fordo to kill that target, that's the capability that you need.
When you hear the story, Mark, when you hear exactly what happened, how you had probably 3 of the B-2s going after the Fordow plant because they used between 5 and 6 of the bunker busters, does that track with you? When you talk about Tomahawk missiles being used to go after Natanz and to go after Isfahan, does that track with you from your experience of flying a B-2? Does all of that track? Is there something that you are questioning and would like more information on?
No, Trace, I think it comes down to the analysis of that target complex. What's the layout? What's the composition? How deep do you have to go? And certainly, what are the vulnerabilities? And the targeteers, the folks that weaponeered that target, that came up with a fantastic plan, I'm sure, looked at those vulnerabilities and decided how many weapons were needed. They may have attacked with other types of weapons as well, but certainly in this case, they decided that 6 of these GBU-57 weapons were required. You know, that's a 30,000-pound bomb, but 24,000 pounds of it is hardened steel. That's what gets it that deep. But 6,000 pounds of high explosives to do the damage once it's in that mission space. But it's a technology that nobody else in the world has developed.
And lastly, I'm just curious, Mark, when you heard that this mission had been employed today, were you surprised or not surprised?
I think a lot of people were surprised, Trace. I'll give a shout out to all the forces involved, the entire joint team, our allies and partners. Tremendous operational security, tremendous deception involved. I think everybody was focused the other direction. Everybody was focused several days down the road, and to keep, thousands of people involved, to keep that secret and to let this mission come off unexpectedly and to have the results that they achieved is a remarkable achievement.
It is remarkable. Stand by if you would, sir. I want to bring back in Sheila Nazarian here because this kind of goes back to what's next, what happens next. And I want to read this because this is Fox obtaining the White House to congressional Republicans about the justification for striking Iran. These are the highlights. It says that Iran was a nation on the threshold of having a nuclear weapon. It goes on to say, as the president had said repeatedly for over a decade, Iran cannot have a nuke because that would be a threat to Americans. The president was clear about this throughout the campaign, saying it dozens of times, which he did. Iranian proxies, including the Houthis, have attacked American troops in recent years, including a drone attack that killed 3 American service members. And finally, Iran has conducted cyber attacks against the U.S. The Iranian regime is accountable for the deaths of more than 1,000 American soldiers and civilians. And we know very well, when you talk about these roadside bombs in Iraq, we know that Iran was responsible for the majority of those roadside bombs. But the argument and the fight is not with the Iranian people. And the Iranian people have to know that. And I know some of them are supporting the regime, but a lot of them, Sheila Nazarian, are not.
Yeah, I've heard about 20% still are pro-regime, and about 80% would like to see regime change and would like to be set free from this oppression. It was said very well today. Anyone who says this war isn't good is either with the regime or has something to gain from it. And I look at, even in America, I look at the people and the influencers that are talking poorly about this possibility that just happened tonight. And it makes you wonder, why? Why are they all of a sudden against taking out the nuclear capability of Iran?
Yeah, it really is. And again, you come back, it always comes back, Steve Hilton, to the political ramifications for something like this. And we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We don't know if we're going to be involved or enmeshed in something that was unforeseen. But for now, when you look at the tally, I mean, if we were keeping score, it doesn't look good for Iran. It doesn't look good. It looks very good if you're sitting at 1,600 right now. It looks very good. It looks like a very smart decision.
Yes, real leadership, like in a way that we haven't seen actually for many, many years in this country. And I just want to address this point about the, if you like, the internal politics. We know for sure that President Trump absolutely doesn't want to get America into some kind of quagmire in the Middle East. He ran on a platform of avoiding that. And that's what this action is all about. There's no sense at all that he wants to see us get involved in any kind of regime change. We've never said that. This is precise and restrained. He's the one who keeps making it clear he wants peace. His argument is not with the Iranian people. And I think that for those who say that this is some kind of, civil war within President Trump's movement, I think that's not true at all. You look at the reaction tonight, someone like my friend Charlie Kirk, strongly behind the president in what he's done. But I think the most important point on the politics of it is actually made by the president himself earlier this week when he said, he was asked, well, is this against MAGA and all that? And he said, I think I'm the one that gets to decide what MAGA is all about. And he's right. Why? Because he's the leader. And what's the characteristic of a leader? People follow him. And that's what we're seeing tonight because of this action.
Yeah, it's interesting. I want to just kind of make sure we get all the voices in here. Special Operations Association of America board member Alex Pleitsis was on. We had Alex on earlier in the week, and I'm wondering your take on all of this, Alex. Is there something that you feel passionate about that we are leaving out of the conversation that you feel is relevant and needs to be addressed?
Just the total damage, I think, that's been done. So if the operation was successful, and I think we'll know in a few hours, in speaking to Israeli officials on the way in, it's just daylight breaking. It'll take them a little time to get the assessment in, as well as from U.S. Central Command. This could potentially set the program back years. And so the president has reset the time clock. There is a complete change in the Middle East that everyone's waking up to this morning. Iran has spent years failing to listen and heed the warnings, and they decided that they were going to continue on a clandestine weaponization path. And as a result of that, they ended up with the strikes that happened today. So the president decided that after trying to push them into negotiations, they weren't listening. The leaders remained defiant.
Don't say it.
Like that. And so the president, I think, didn't want to deal with this again down the road in the event that the strikes were unsuccessful on the Israeli side. And if they had to put commandos on the ground, if somebody was captured or killed, it prolongs the conflict. I think he just wanted to be done with it. And he's made it clear he doesn't want regime change. And so now it's up to Iran to see if they're going to heed his warning.
Yeah, Alex, please stand by if you would. I want to bring Cameron Hamilton back into the conversation here because, Cameron, it looks to me like desperation is a good word when you're talking about the Iranian regime right now. And I'm wondering if you, if you think that maybe the desperation leads to them closing the Strait of Hormuz, maybe kind of activating some of these terror cells that we know are active in both Europe and in the United States. And quite frankly, because we have a lack of knowledge about who exactly is in the United States over the past 4 years, that might propagate this even further. Do you think that might be a next step, or do you think we're going a different direction?
I think that's absolutely a reasonable outcome that should be expected. Iran has, again, been very decentralized with a lot of its expected. Iran has, again, possibly even affect some of our counterparts in Europe is likely. At this point, the basis of desperation will kick in. I think Iran will look wherever and anywhere it can possibly get victories in an effort to save face against the West.
Yeah, Cameron, thank you. I want to play this soundbite. This, Kevin, is soundbite number one. It's Brigadier General Mark Kimmon, and he's talking about, he's basically talking candidly about the mission. Watch.
Well, I'm fascinated, and candidly, I'm impressed. I never really could understand what the 2-week pause meant or what it was for. What was left to negotiate? I think the use of deception and trickery in this case, first of all, was successful, but second of all, saved the potential loss of American lives.
Yeah, and with that question, let's bring in Mark Montgomery again. Admiral, I'm wondering if you think that that's a fair assessment, because you're pleased and you're, at the same time, you're a little bit confused at the strategy going in. What do you think?
I agree with General Kimmon. I think there's some deception involved in that. You don't want to say, I'm done with them, I'm attacking tonight. I mean, I think the B-2s are very, the stealth in it was secure enough that they weren't threatened. They wouldn't have been taken down in any case. But of our military.
no immediate military response that we've seen so far from Iran.
And it's now, as you know, a Sunday morning already in Israel and Tel Aviv, where you are. Normally, it's a regular work day in Israel. Schools are open, but now everything seems to be shutting down. Schools are closed. People are being told to stay home, basically. They want to err on the side of caution and be prepared in case the Iranians do start launching significant ballistic missiles towards Israel. Is that right?
It is right. I drove down from Haifa in the north of the country just as the sun was rising, and there was plenty of commercial trucking out on the road. So the country, I think it's important to say, Israel is still very much functioning and things are going on, but it's the essential activities that are happening. You know, over the last few days, people had taken a slightly more relaxed posture. The government has said it was okay for people to gather in workspaces as long as a shelter was nearby. It was okay for people to gather in groups of up to 30. Now it's a step back from that, but in all other ways, the country is functioning. You might find some stores that are closed, some cafes and restaurants that are closed, perhaps slightly fewer people out on the streets. But in a commercial sense, what we witnessed this morning, the country is very much acting as normal in that regard, Wolf.
The schools are basically closed, at least for the time being. All right, Nick Robertson, thank you very, very much. Nick's in Tel Aviv. I want to bring in David Sanger right now. He's a White House and national security correspondent for the New York Times. He's also a CNN political and national security analyst. David, give me your reaction to these historic U.S. strikes on these three main Iranian nuclear facilities.
Well, Wolf, it's a remarkable evening. I think it was pretty clear in the past 72 hours that the president was headed this way. But I'd say that there were probably three notable parts of this. The first is the president avoided the risk that something could go wrong here, that they would lose an airplane, that a crew would end up in captivity in Iran and so forth. So that in itself was a big win. The president says these sites were completely obliterated. It's going to be a little while before we know that about Fordo, particularly, which is the most deeply buried one and the hardest one for everybody to get at. I don't have any doubt that Isfahan was completely obliterated, and that's a very important site because it is where the Iranians were keeping their near bomb grade nuclear fuel. So we have to figure out the short term, whether he got at the program. And then finally, Wolf, there's the big question of, did the United States engineer this well enough that the Iranians can't respond? And it's going to be a long while before we quite figure that out.
Yeah, and the Iranians, if they do respond, not just the U.S., but the Israelis will know where those missiles, those rockets are coming from, and you can anticipate a very strict, a very speedy U.S. and or Israeli retaliation. Is that right?
I think that's right, but actually it's a different kind of retaliation that I'm concerned about. The missiles we'll see, acts of terrorism, hostage taking, cyber attacks. Those are all going to be the harder thing for the Israelis or for the United States to see. Obviously, it's the U.S. that the military leadership in Iran is going to want revenge against. They can't reach the U.S. with missiles. They can reach U.S. bases, and they can, of course, reach the continental United States with cyber. I thought it was really interesting that the president's tone was not, look, we were just going after the nuclear program and we're going away now. It was, if you don't give in completely on all of our demands, we're coming back.
Yeah, he said specifically, we know there are many more targets to go after in Iran, and if you don't give up and accept our demands, those are going to be targeted as well. Very strong statement from the President of the United States. David Sanger, as usual, thank you very, very much. CNN's Fred Pleitgen was the first Western journalist to enter Iran after the conflict with Israel began. He's in Tehran with Iran's early reaction to the U.S. strikes.
Hi there, Wolf. Yeah, we are getting some official reaction from the Iranians now. Iran's Atomic Energy Organization came out and condemned what they call these savage attacks on their nuclear facility. They also called them against international law. But they also said that all of this will not deter their nuclear program, which they say is very peaceful, and also which they say that they have a right to. Now, as you can see, it still is the early morning hours, the crack of dawn here in Tehran. Right now, the skies over the Iranian capital are fairly quiet. However, what we've seen in the overnight hours was the air defenses here very much active. We also heard some thuds, which could have come from airstrikes, but could also have been outgoing air defense systems as well. And of course, it's unclear whether or not that could have been related to the fact that the U.S. was flying these strike missions, but it was definitely something that we noticed in the overnight hours. As the morning progresses here in Tehran, Wolf, there are some parliamentarians who are coming out and also condemning the U.S.'s action. There's one senior member of parliament who came out a couple of minutes ago and said that the U.S., as he put it, can bomb installations but cannot bomb knowledge, obviously saying almost the same thing as the Energy Organization, saying that the Iranians are going to continue their nuclear program, are going to continue enrichment as well. Of course, the Iranians, Wolf, have threatened that there could be and would be retaliation if the United States gets involved in the standoff between Iran and Israel. I was speaking to the deputy vice president just yesterday, and he came out and he said, look, Iranians have so many different possibilities to confront the United States here in this region. One of them, of course, being some of those militias that they control and that they're on Iran's side in the region. But the Iranians also say that there are other things as well. And the Iranians have also said that despite the fact that the last couple of days, of course, have been quite difficult for them, with parts of their military leadership having been taken out by Israeli strikes, that all of that is already replenished and that Iran's military is still very capable and also capable of striking back, for instance, at Israel, but of course at other places as well, Wolf.
All right, Fred Pleitgen reporting for us from Tehran. Thank you, Fred, very, very much. CNN military analyst and retired U.S. Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton is joining us right now. Colonel, thanks very much for joining us. Give us your reaction to what has happened. How significant have these U.S. strikes on Iran been?
Well, they've been very significant. This is the first time that we've actually gone after the Iranian facilities, and it's also the first time that we've used the massive ordnance penetrator, that 30,000-pound bomb, in combat, in any type of combat operation. And when you look at the total of the ordnance, it was 360,000 pounds that were used against the Fordo facility by itself, and then another 60,000 pounds on Natanz. So when you take all that together, 420,000 pounds of ordnance, that is a massive show of firepower against two of Iran's nuclear facilities. Then you add the Tomahawk missiles, about 30 or so, as General Clark, I think, had mentioned previously. That is a significant show of force, and it is pretty clear that the goal of what both the U.S. and the Israelis were trying to do is to actually do their best to cripple, at least for a time, the nuclear program that Iran has right now. So this is a significant milestone in the whole issue between the United States and Iran when it comes to the nuclear power and the nuclear weapons aspect of things. And it's also a show of force that the United States has used against the Iranians. And that is something that has not been as overt as this particular operation was.
Colonel, how much capacity does Iran still have right now to make good on its threats to retaliate against the United States for these military strikes?
So that is an open question right now, Wolf. We do know, of course, that Iran continues to have a large number of missiles. The Israelis say that they've destroyed about 50% of Iran's missile launchers, but that still leaves, somewhere between 1,000 to 1,500 potentially missiles that they could use in Iran itself. Now, many of those missiles will not be capable of reaching targets in Israel, but they may be capable of reaching targets along the western shore of the Persian Gulf, and that would mean the potential to strike U.S. military installations in places like Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, or Kuwait, or Bahrain. All of those are possibilities, but I think the U.S. is very carefully looking at those possibilities, and there will probably be some defenses that the U.S. has established already that will make it much harder for the Iranians to go after these particular installations. So it is possible that the Iranians are going to do this, but it's going to be, I think, a long time coming. We can look at more asymmetric threats, as David was mentioning, such as cyber attacks and assassinations and terror attacks as being something that they might try to do. But again, their capacity will be limited in the immediate aftermath of these attacks.
What do you think, Colonel, that this U.S. strike, what do you think it means for Israel's military campaign against Iran going forward?
I think it actually helps, interestingly enough, pave the way for even more Israeli attacks. The Israelis kind of paved the way for the American attacks in some respects because they took out a lot of the Iranian air defenses, a lot of the radars associated with those defensive operations, and that is absolutely significant. The B-2 has a lot of stealth capabilities. And it was very much a low observable aircraft, as the terminology goes. But the key thing here is that it made it the Israeli actions made it even safer for the U.S. B-2s to go through with their mission, to carry out their mission. The fact that the U.S. took out, at least as far as we can tell, took out these three nuclear sites, that is significant in that it diverts resources from the Iranians potentially and allows the Israelis to continue their operations, not only in the western part of the country, which they've done quite well, but potentially they could extend that even further into the central and even the eastern part of the country if they so choose to do that.
Retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton, our CNN military analyst, as usual. Thank you very, very much. And joining us now, CNN senior national security analyst Juliet Kayyem. Juliet is also a Harvard professor and former U.S. Assistant Secretary at the Department of Homeland Security. Juliet, thanks so much for joining us. How much concern should there be about Iranian retaliation? And I'm specifically worried, and I'm sure you are and other U.S. officials are, about the potential of Iran launching domestic U.S. terrorist attacks here in the United States.
I think that the threat has definitely gotten higher, and it's worth having these sort of second order discussions. Tonight, honestly, was about tactics, and now we have to think about what the strategy will be for the United States as well as Iran. The biggest threats to the United States are more likely than not abroad. Those include the Straits of Hormuz. We have about 50 oil tankers as of tonight trying to get out of there. They are let's just be clear here. They are nervous, and I would anticipate the market is going to respond on gas and oil with gas and oil on Monday. Secondly, you have the homeland security concerns that don't have to be physical. You have cybersecurity concerns in particular, but you also have our troops, U.S. interest, European interest, European countries, and American tourists abroad. We now know that Americans are not even able to get out of Israel, that there was no plans for that. So the fact that we haven't really heard a discussion about sort of what are going to be the protections is worrisome. And finally, we have a Department of Homeland Security created in the wake of 9/11 and the horror that happened here, whose focus has been, as we've been reporting for a couple weeks now, has been on immigration. And so its cybersecurity, its counterterrorism efforts have been either eviscerated or being run by people who don't have a background in the kind of threats that we should be worried now. I know we've had a lot of military analysts on about the potential of success and a transformative nature of what this could be. I'm a little bit less optimistic because one, we don't know the transformative nature of this military attack yet, but I think we have to be eyes wide open about Iran being a superpower in the Arab world and its capacity to respond, one can say it's worth it, but it's a discussion we should be having.
So, but what I hear you saying, Julia, correct me if I'm wrong, the U.S. should preemptively take a bunch of steps right now, worried about a worst case scenario, Iranian terrorist attacks against various U.S. targets, either in the United States domestically or around the world.
Right. So one is what's our troop protection looking like right now? And we haven't seen anything publicly. Second, will the Department of Homeland Security move its massive focus on these ICE raids? Honestly, and this is not political, we know the rest of DHS has been eviscerated because of this focus by the Trump administration into cybersecurity. Its cybersecurity agency is basically on fumes right now, as well as counterterrorism, which is being run by people who are really not from the world of counterterrorism. Next is intelligence. We've had challenges with our allies. Donald Trump is suspicious of them. We know that there's a debate about what our own intelligence was telling us. What is our intelligence telling us, and are we going to act on it? All of those pieces are part of a strategy for what the secondary, the next phase responses could be. It could be Iran is, begging to get to the negotiating table. That would be your best case scenario. I am, as you know, your worst case scenario person in terms of have we thought through what these second order impacts are. The military tactics tonight, brave soldiers doing a brave military doing something that the president commanded them to do successfully. We don't know the consequences of that yet. We don't know whether this was a historic strike or was this just something that's going to delay Iran for a while. But we do know that that planning for such a military action also requires a defensive posture by the attacking country. We are no longer I guess an honest broker, right? I mean, people know that we support Israel. People in the Arab world and people in Europe know that we support Israel. We've taken a step tonight in terms of becoming the aggressor, so to speak, becoming the actor. That changes our capacity to move things around in terms of both our diplomacy, but our defensive action. This is not, none of us on air today know which way this is going to go, but it is worth spending some time considering what those consequences could be if this action was not as successful as we've been told tonight.
Well, the stakes are clearly enormous. Julia Kayyem, excellent analysis. Thank you very, very much. I'm Wolf Blitzer in New York. Thanks very much for watching. Jim Sciutto picks up our breaking news coverage of the U.S. strike on Iran right after a quick break.
Can I have another pancake?
Yeah. From Full House to Empty Nest to Free Birds. Vanguard.
We got this.
50 years of helping you invest